I think that back in the 60s, a lot of the notions that we had to do with things like whether the culture would be co-opted, whether your integrity would be compromised, things like that. And I think that these days, those values are becoming more and more meaningless because, in fact, the individual, at least from the perspective of a record company surviving in the record business and putting out music that you believe in, supporting artists that you like, and realistically being able to do that much to affect their career, it's more and more difficult to do very much.
How much do you think the romance, I've been influenced a lot by a 2 or 3 page article written in the 70s by an American studies professor at Buffalo named Charles Keel, who wrote Urban Blues, and a book he wrote in the 60s, which was probably his dissertation, and adapted into a book. He most recently wrote a book on polka. He's an American studies scholar with an ethnomusicological bent. Maybe he is a trained ethnomusicologist. But he wrote this essay in the 70s called Who Needs the Folk? And his approach in this very short piece was that too much romanticization was, objectifying groups of people who were basically just poor people cut off from the mainstream for entertainment purposes. And I was influenced by that for a while, and he said it helped folklorists to find themselves, it helped the middle class to find themselves. Look how broad I am. I not only I like it all. I not only like the Beatles and Sinatra, but I like Dewey Balfa. I'm a Renaissance individual. But and he put it down very much, and I was influenced by that a lot because I believe in economic empowerment and what have you. But after a while, the more I started playing with Kyle's concepts and trying to incorporate them into my own framework of thinking, I found that I couldn't, because I do have a romantic view of what a lot of revival activity is, and I think it brought me to.
You want me to get rid of them?
You don't have to get rid of them.
Okay.
That's all right. That's okay. Thanks.
No.
I do think that romance isn't all bad as a motivating force, and I don't think it's all evil, and I don't think it leads you to treat people as something other than people.
Yeah.
And maybe I can say that because I'm the romanticizer, that I'm the comfortable middle class, urban white guy. But I don't think it's all bad.
Well, and not only is it all bad, but I think
not all
that
bad.
not all bad.
Yeah.
Not only is it not all bad, but I think it helps to forge a link in terms of consciousness and so on between classes also, because there's no question that at least being recognized as being someone who's interesting and whose place in the world is not only valid and legitimate, but can be inspiring to other people, is something that is very empowering to those people. And I came from those people, and I've seen that. I mean, and the other thing is that I think that in this country, even though I agree that ultimately there needs to be economic empowerment and media empowerment, and unfortunately the market forces of capitalism and of media and media consumption completely gravitates away from that. So therefore, if there isn't some sort of individual forging of a connection and a consciousness just on a grassroots basis, there usually simply is going to be less and less recognition, and then those classes do get those cultures, folk cultures, whatever. Because the main reason that I see for objecting to the concept of a folk is there really isn't much of a folk in the sense of it's different from and not part of everybody is affected so much by mainstream culture and by television culture in particular, and that manifestation of what is mainstream. But there really isn't a pure folk anymore. But I think that people, depending on where they come from, obviously musically, there's still a lot of traditionally based music and traditionally based cultures. And I think it's very enriching to mainstream culture, whether you're talking literarily or musically. And that there's no question about that.
I think if you romanticize the idea of the folk to the point where you don't accept mainstream cultural influences, then I think you do run into problems. That is, because then you get into the situation where you say, well, Mingo Saldivar.
Your oppression is good for you. Stay pure.
Exactly. Well, that says it really well. I mean, the point is, no matter what type of extra-traditional influences come to bear on a Balfa, on a Saldivar, their music is still identifiably non-mainstream. Their music is still identifiably of a tradition that is unique to a certain group of people out of which they came. Nobody's going to tell me that Steve Riley sounds like mainstream music, singing in French, playing the accordion. You produce that music and you still give a voice to another world, even if it's not the way that world existed in 1930.
Right.
And one thing that you folks should know quite plainly, when people, certainly at UT, they've asked me, what's the biggest impediment to your doing this project? You personally, what's your biggest hindrance? And it's that I don't have a musical vocabulary. I don't know how much...
None of the three of us.
And that's what I think. I've gleaned that. I'm one of these guys. I've always been, like I'm sure I'm a huge record collector. I have every record I've bought since I was 13. I have thousands of records and CDs. I've always loved
Most
music.
musicians, by the way, don't consider that an impediment.
Yeah, okay. I'm not the guy.
As long as you enjoy music and you're interested in it, that's far more... I don't think that the music needs, musical analysis. There are ethnomusicologists and stuff.
I am not the guy who is going to write about the musical significance of, the new acoustic movement or newgrass or how it differs musically from Bill Monroe. I'm not your guy. I'm not one of these guys who you could change the bass player in the band and I'll never know it. You could even bring in a bass, like they say, bass players exist only for the band.
I'm kind of like that too.
You can change the bass player 10 times. You can bring in a newly innovative bass player. The singer's the same, if the vein is the same, if I like it, if it moves me, I'll still know if it's what I call Cajun music.
Yeah.
And so, that's my, confession or something. I'm not your guy to write about how you've explored musically the boundaries of bluegrass and, broadened them with Bella Fleck or something. I'm not, I'm interested in what role you play with community.
Yeah, and you're learning enough of the kinds of broad strokes things that identifies.
Oh, and I probably have. I mean, I read, I subscribe to everything under the sun. As I was telling you, I read No Depression, the Old Time Herald, and, Living Blues and Bluegrass Unlimited. And I've done that for years, to the point of ludicrousness, where they pile up and I can't.
I know, like by my desk at work.
And sure, I know what the broad strokes are.
Yep.
I'm not the guy to talk about, the increased use of augmented something, but
minor chords in the blues or something.
Yeah, I can't do it. Yep. Maybe. Why don't you go back to telling me about the start? I mean, what's your best memories? What's your earliest memories? If you want to do this now, I mean, I think ultimately we got to get through.
Everything okay here?
It's been
great. I'm okay right now.
Okay. Yeah. That's when we started, did you say?
I don't know, even, you came out of, I gather, fairly, working class or lower class straights yourself up in Maine.
Yeah.
What's your family do?
The same thing that everybody in that area does. So they sort of do whatever is available seasonally, which means that in the summertime they could be doing anything from raking blueberries to working in the blueberry factory. That's a big industry where I grew up.
Now, what community is this? I know it's in Maine, but what?
It's just a very old coastal community. It's been there since the late 18th century, and that's. My dad was a guide to hunters and fishermen in the fall and the spring, and then we raked blueberries in the summertime. My dad worked in the lumber in the woods, helping to roll logs downriver before the lumber industry was mechanized. So all of those kinds of things.
Is he still alive?
No, he died about 8 years ago. And my mom did all of the same stuff except working in the woods. So she worked as a maid in a motel for a while, and she did anything that she could find that would sort of help and support the family.
Did you have siblings?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Three younger brothers and 2 younger brothers and a younger sister.
4 of them.
Yep. And yet we had our own subsistence garden, and a root cellar. So we raised our own potatoes and all of those kinds of things that lasted through the year. And there were lots and lots of. Well, the year I graduated from high school was 1966. On the parents' confidential statement that you have to file for financial aid, our total family income for a family of 6, 4 kids and 2 adults, in terms of reported income, was $2,200. And we never felt like we were really poor. We had food. And my parents, we didn't have a lot of clothes, but we had all the books we wanted. Mm-hmm. My parents would definitely go without to just buy a book, and we were read to at home. Didn't have television, until I would say 6th grade or so. And so it was very isolated. It was like living in the 19th century.
That was late. Are they Jewish? Did you?
No.
Okay,
No, I converted to Judaism when around shortly after I got married.
Leighton didn't sound, but I never know what derivation.
I was raised
what
a Baptist,
were.
in fact.
Okay.
Raised a Baptist. And I was religious as a child. And so I do feel comfortable being identified with a religion, although I'm not a big fan of institutional religion. And Judaism, frankly, is a lot more democratic than most.
But no particular music. You guys were a musical family on
No.
the coast of Maine, one of these Moash.
No.
Look what we found.
We weren't of the folk.
Yeah, that's right, in that regard. Okay.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Not a musical family at all.
Okay. And you
In
went
fact,
to
I was far more reading and word and literature oriented than I was musically oriented.
And what clearly has to distinguish you, I would imagine, from a lot of your contemporaries there in your high school is that you went off to college.
That's when I left. Yeah.
And where'd you go to school?
I went to a small private university here in Massachusetts, Clark University, and then I got a master's in history and.
Much nationally known.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I got a master's in history at Northeastern in Boston at the same time that Ken and Bill were in graduate school.
They were at Tufts?
They went to Tufts undergraduate, and then Ken he got a master's in special education from Wheelock College. He was one of about 2 males in the whole program. And then he went to Cornell to work on his doctorate in family studies and child development and family studies. And Bill was in political science at Tufts, and then went to the University of Chicago to start his doctorate, and then wound up getting involved in the anti-war movement and going off to the Poor People's March on Washington, taking photographs, trying to make that into a dissertation, but basically not going to classes.
Yeah.
So he wound up getting a terminal master's from the University of Chicago, drove a cab in New York City for a while, and then for the first 10 years or so after we started Rounder, he was finishing up his doctorate at Tufts. He went back to Tufts after getting his terminal master's from the University of Chicago, and was a professor within the state university system here in Massachusetts. So he kind of supported our little household. I mean, Ken and I worked part-time at various things, but
Couldn't have been on very much.
No.
I mean, he was still a PhD student for
Yep.
most of that time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. But back in those days, it was so easy to live on very little. I mean, our rent in the first apartment we lived in, I think, was like about $100 a month.
How did you meet them? Now, you haven't heard any identity of schools. You met them outside.
Actually, Ken and I met through, he was working as part of his special ed program. He was working at a little school in Portland, Maine. And this was the summer after my freshman year of college. And I was working, at that time I was thinking of being a political science major. And I was working at City Hall as part of the Urban Renewal Authority in Portland. And he and I met at a little folks club and just started talking. He had a book about blues, and so we just started talking. And that's how we got to know each other.
Portland, Maine?
Portland, Maine, yeah.
Okay.
And then that year, so I was in Boston, Ken was at Cornell, and Bill was at Chicago. And this would have been in 66, spring of in the fall of '67 and spring of '68.
Right.
That's we went to Club 47, and Ken and I went and hooked up with Bill, who was just home on vacation, and we went to your buddy Guy and Junior Wells at Club 47, which is now Passim.
Yeah.
It's in the location where Passim is now located in Harvard Square. And in fact, you should have Bill take you there because it's such a
I'd like to.
classic place in Harvard Square.
And I've read of it for years and years and years.
And that's where I first heard bluegrass.
Now, Passim is is that the original location of the original Club 47? No. Okay, so the original Club 47 is
was on 47 Mount Auburn Street.
Okay, and that's gone. That's the place where Baez came out of. That's the geographical.
Right. But it's at 47 Palmer Street.
Okay.
So it is another 47.
I think they lobby for a number change. I believe I read that somewhere. They went out and they lobbied they talked the city into reassigning the numbers so they
But
could be
Passim
47.
still carries that on, and there are links even with personnel who work there, like Betsy Siggins, who was married to Bob Siggins of the Charles River Valley Boys, which is the first bluegrass
she's
that I
in
ever
that
heard.
book, Garrett Marshall's book.
Yeah. And she's one of the main people now at Passim in booking the talent. And then we started in school vacations and summers going to like the Union Grove Old Time Fiddlers Convention.
Still where now? Bill is still in
Bill
Chicago.
had a VW bus.
How is everybody back here now? Through what?
Just school vacation. Bill grew up in the Boston area. His parents lived in Lexington.
Okay, and you were here. But Ken
I was here
still
for college.
down at Cornell.
Ken was hitchhiking back and forth from Ithaca to Boston. Yeah.
Okay, you just became friends? Such good friends? Okay.
And actually, Ken and I were. It should come out. I mean.
That's where we're
it's not a
going here.
secret.
Let's get this. I didn't know.
Ken and I
were a couple.
We were a couple
Okay.
for the first 3 years of Rounder.
That's what makes 25-year-olds hitch back and forth to
Yeah.
see friends.
Yes.
Boys and girls. That's why I needed to
And I hitchhiked to Ithaca.
understand
And in
this.
fact,
Yeah.
when Ken was at Cornell, I took off part of the year from Clark and lived there while he was finishing up his coursework in graduate school. And then he came back to Worcester and lived with me while I was finishing up my undergraduate degree at Clark. And then the three of us lived together at the apartment in Somerville, where Bill had been living the previous year, which we sort of refer to as the no-bedroom apartment because it had a couple of bedrooms with sort of alcove doorways off the hall. But it was like $100 a month, so it was great, and we just filled it with records and did the early Rounder work there. So that was, we were actually all together in 1971.
Okay.
And had started Rounder while Ken and I were living in Worcester while I was going to Clark in 1970.
Right. So let's backtrack. And you were already listening. I've talked to Ken a little bit about his tastes. What were your musical tastes in the 60s? Well, you were around. I mean, Cambridge was a hotbed.
But see, I'm just a little bit younger than they were, so I was kind of the tail end of the folk revival. I heard the Charles River Valley Boys at Club 47, but this was, after Bob Dylan and Joan Baez had become big stars.
Okay,
and
so
on,
you're
whereas
talking
Ken and
64, 65, 66?
Well, 66 is when I started college.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's very much the tail end of the boom.
Whereas Ken and Bill were very much, shall we say, the cutting edge, because when Bob Dylan's first record was out, before he went electric, in fact, they were one of the people. No, they were one of the few gay-sayers.
Yeah.
When he played at Tufts, they were totally a Bob Dylan fan, and not that many people at Tufts were into Bob Dylan when they were both rabid fans.
Did you come to folk music by yourself, or was it Ken's influence?
A combination of the two, actually, because Ken wasn't in Boston a lot, so on my own. But I've always liked the blues, I would say, at least as much, if not more. But that was also true for Bill.
Yeah. That's what I buy. I buy blues records.
Yeah. And that remains blues, and as I get older, jazz have become the things that I tend to listen to most when I get home.
Yeah. So you started going down to Union Grove?
Yes, we started going to Union Grove and to Galax, and Bill to the Ann Arbor Blues Festival, and then he knew Bruce Kaplan, who was one of the people at the University of Chicago Folk Festival.
Right.
Bruce was much ahead of us, I would say, in that regard. And Bill came to know Bruce Kaplan when he was going to graduate school at the University of Chicago.
Do we pay her here, or do we get up and do it?
We can do it on our way out.
Oh, okay.
But so that was so I kind of learned a lot on my own. Although I will say that I was probably as interested in reading Samuel Beckett and Harold Pinter and Tennessee Williams and Eugene O'Neill as I was listening to music.
Yeah.
So to me, it was all a part of the cultural milieu that I had, been waiting all my life to escape from my town and get to be where I wanted to be.
Do you remember well those early, Union Grove festivals and what have you, and your own reaction to them?
Yeah.
When you first arrived, can you recall?
Yes, and I'm sure that now they're much more out of control and much larger. But if you're from the north, I mean, it was absolutely mind-boggling and eye-opening at how much drinking and drugs went on among college kids in the South. Because if you're from the country the way I was, I mean, both of my parents were teetotalers, not because they were so religious, but they simply didn't drink. So, and I was basically a really serious student all the time growing up because I knew that was going to be my ticket out. If I didn't get good grades, I wouldn't get the federal economic opportunity grant money and scholarships that I needed to be able to leave and live the kind of life that I read about in Hemingway's Immovable Feast about Paris in the 1920s and stuff. So, to me, but I never saw a bottle of beer until I was in college in Boston. So it was quite an eye-opener, and of course it was just the beginning of the hippie culture in 66 and 67, the anti-war movement. And both Bill Rounder and I went from being very conservative politically to becoming completely committed to and a part of the anti-war movement, which Ken was too, but it was much more consistent and continuous with Ken's past. He'd always been kind of liberal, and so it was sort of just continuing in that direction for him. With Bill and me, it was a real flip-flop.
Yeah.
And I would say that, in general, probably Bill and I are much more extreme intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
Ken has always been ruled by inertia and trying to keep things as much the same as possible of the things that he likes in his own eccentric way.
Was he doing okay last night, by the way? I know I'm digressing off of this. Was he? I didn't want to, I feel very much, I don't want to disrupt people's lives or make them unhappy.
You picked up on it very well.
Oh, well, I mean, it was clear from the moment we sat down.
Yeah.
I felt this is, we shouldn't be here now or something. And he said to me back at the house, I mean, he knew it, and he said, I'm not much of a whiner and diner. And I said, I don't need to be whining now at all. Fluorescent lights, Formica tabletops, lo mein, anything. Saying, I'm fine.
Yeah. But you know what? That's one of the things, that's just part of what Ken and Donna will have to iron out, because Donna, in fact, likes going out from time to time. And literally, for all of us, no, it's not that we are into whining and dining. I mean, it's like Joseph's is the kind of place we go to maybe a couple of times a year. As I mentioned, the last time I'd been there was to take Gordon Beadle, the sax player who records for us on Bullseye, and his wife there when he was playing in the Grog one night, shortly after they'd gotten married. But Ken is he's the one of the three of us who has remained utterly locked in to living life as if it were 1970 or 71. And it's fine. We don't have a problem with that, except for the fact that we all don't want to do that all the time, including Donna. Now, Donna is, of course, considerably younger than Ken is. And she often feels that Ken isolates her, frankly. And Ken is a kind of isolated person in some respects. I mean, he's also a wonderful person who's great with bluegrass, is inspired and utterly passionate about and committed to that music. But he never kind of grew up in the sense of, like, being able to relax about certain things.
Like owning a house.
Like owning a house,
Yeah.
or even having a glass of wine. Poor Donna, she has one glass of wine. Ken will look her askance, like, oh my God, she's turning into a lush. You know?
This is a hippie from the 60s?
Well,
That's
exactly.
an odd, there's
Yes.
a Puritan streak
Yes. that frankly none of us really understand.
Okay.
I think it has something in his mind to do with being pure.
Bourgeois.
Yeah.
If you have a glass of wine, and particularly if you have a glass of wine in Joseph's, he's wrestling a great deal with suddenly being pulled into changes that are not of his making.
Okay. And yet at the same time, those of us who know him and have loved him all his life, know that to a large degree, this is his last chance for happiness.
Well, I'm glad that I
Madonna's the best thing that ever happened to him, and he does realize that.
Okay.
But it's sort of like, in some respects, he's sort of being dragged kicking and screaming into the real world. And at the same time, he'll rise to the occasion like he was the one who really decided and wanted to get that house, as opposed to looking for something much more modest. But at the same time, he has, I think, in his mind come to terms with the fact that it's a wonderful old historic house that means a lot in the life of his town. I don't have problems with that, and in fact, living in an old house and being interested in period furnishings and period decorations and stuff, to me, is a lot like my musical tastes.
Sure. Yeah.
But Ken doesn't either intellectually or at a gut level get that. I mean, I'll show you my house sometime, but which he absolutely loves. He's very comfortable being there, and was long before he and Donna saw and got that house in May. But it's all very new to him, and yet at the same time, there's a side of Ken that it's almost like he doesn't feel that he should have nice things or something. Whereas I don't think of it so much as nice things. I think of it as a particular type of nice thing that happens to be suited to someone like me who likes things that are the best of traditional things.
Right.
And that's the only way I look at it. And also that, frankly, we've been so blessed in the work that we do, in not only being able to do it, but to have it flourish and be successful, that to me, owning someplace like that and restoring a house that does mean something to the community that I love is in a way being able to give back something to a lot of other people. And I don't have a problem with it, but he does. But then I grew up in a poor family, and he grew up in a privileged family.
Right, I'm sure.
So it's very, it's odd. I think that he has more sort of white suburban guilt, shall we say.
And you hit on a lot of the problems that revivalists have with the folk. The folk say, give me a record deal, give me a tour, give me an agent, let me make some money, let me play, I want to play good music.
And I have no problem with that.
It's so Clifton Chenier always used to tell Chris Strachwitz, no, you got to play R&B. The kids aren't going to want to dance this crap you want me to play. And Chris would come, and Chris has told me this, that he used to, have these, battles with Clifton about what, he wanted Clifton to play, and Clifton wanted to play. I want to play music people are going to buy. What you talking about?
Yeah. And Chris, of course, similar to Ken, also is from a very privileged background, but who kind of romanticizes the folk, and thank God he does in certain respects, because otherwise a lot of the purer strains of that music. Of course, and the other thing is that, of course, Chris, and I think this is true of the record business in general, is a pragmatist. So I don't believe he ever thought that you can make any of these people completely pure. He knows, just the way anyone who's actually involved in music knows, that there is no influence-free. Would you like any more coffee?
I'm fine.
Thanks. That Clifton listened to R&B, just like the R&B people heard Zydeco.
Yeah.
I mean, it just like Tony Russell's book about blacks, whites, and the blues. There's a cross-pollinization. It's always existed, especially in this country.
But last night, you made me a lot more comfortable last night, because you clearly wanted to be there and having a good time, and I was watching Ken, and I'm saying, Donna wanted to be there, and I said, I can't do anything about this.
No.
But,
no, you were fine, and I wasn't sure how much you were picking up on. I appreciate you mentioning it, because you're right, and he doesn't understand that people would even notice that, and he's just very incorrigible about, well, if I don't want to do it, God damn it, no one's going to make it. And I'll simply sit here and have nothing. I'll just nibble off Donna's plate, Marian's plate, and let Mike wonder what's going on.
Well, And it doesn't bother me that much. I want him to have a nice time. I want him
But
to
you know, that's
think
what
that
Donna would
this
like.
can be of value to...
But he's not comfortable having a nice time.
Mm.
You'll see.
So he's a Puritan. He's an old...
He's a real Puritan, and he's really... the other thing that's
he's
very...
a Pete Seeger.
You'll find it very interesting, though. Pete knows how to relax, though. The other thing that you'll find in terms of personal interactions in our little triumvirate is I'm the one who's always had more of a life aside from just the music. That's a big part of, and at certain points in my life was almost, the entire part of my life. But I always read books. I always had an appreciation for other things, and I always had friends who were outside of the record business.
Right.
Ken and Bill have always been much more the workaholics, and I remember one time John Cohen from the New York City Ramblers was visiting our apartment at 65 Park Street in Somerville, which was the apartment we moved to after we outgrew 727 Somerville Avenue, where we started. And it was very interesting because I thought, in fact, that John, more than Ken, Bill, and I, as the committed political radicals, and harking back more a sort of beatnik and hippie kind of style in the sense of values, made an interesting observation. And he looked where Bill's room was and where Ken's room was, and there was nothing personal at all. It was just all records. That was it. Whereas where I lived, there were, makeshift bookshelves. There were cinder block bookshelves, and there were books. There was Nietzsche. There were, the things that I always loved and had never stopped reading. And he said, you're the only one who will probably be happy because you're not completely defined by your work. And he actually said something like that to Ken and Bill, and they were like, I don't know what that means or what he's talking about, but I knew completely what he's talking about, which is, and it's true, that's one of the reasons we've done as well as we have, is we have two people who are real workaholics. I'm as committed to it as they are, and we all have shared a similar vision. So we've all pretty much, Rounder has pretty much functioned by consensus. So we all like what we're doing and pretty much agree on everything that we wind up putting out. But I'm the one who also sort of takes steps back, I would say, more often and tries to take a larger view. And that's what Ken and Bill would say also. Bill at one point said, well, you're the conscience of Rounder. And he was sort of looking for me to have a function when I didn't feel that I needed in particular to have another function. But
Okay.
And I've always been more involved in the publicity and promotional aspect of things. But, and they've always been more the detail people. They've always been more involved in like bookkeeping and accounting kinds of stuff and legal stuff. And it's always been involved just in artist relations, producing Bluegrass, and with production.
Right.
Which is interesting.
So why don't we return to Union Grove? You want to move to the office, or do you want to?
We probably should.
Let's do that. We leave for a couple of hours, pay this up, and down to Union Grove and experiencing that with.
Well, aside from the culture shock.
Uh-huh. This is fine.
Are we going?
Yeah, we're going.
Well, aside from the culture shock of how everybody just seemed to be getting totally wasted in Chicago, in a way that just wouldn't experience in places like the Folk Festival. Yeah, it was just, I think all of us, Ken and Bill, had been to Union Grove and that's what I had. So it was my first experience with,
him take place. You tape dropped in Ken's lap. You decided to be a record company and put this out. I guess from a legal or business standpoint, you owned it. You didn't have to talk to Pegger. Is that the case, strictly speaking?
No,
Not to say you would have done that,
I
but
think that, I can't remember whether it built the funds, but I think we actually did see contact with Don to take and Davidson agree that, I mean, because we were been on board with actual specifics on it, but we, all three of us felt it was very important to have a very democratic structure. And back in those days, since nobody was reporting on it, most of the artists we were invested in, it was very simple to say, we're going to pay this part everybody. It was a George Becker, exactly the same royalty. I think it was like 25 cents a record back in those days. And then it would become 50 cents after we sold 500 copies, which would take years. And so it was completely democratic. It wasn't like, well, this market has been a place that costs more to live, so therefore we need to be giving them more. It was going to be exactly the same. And I don't think that either the Smart Gap or Mr. George Becker were exactly bowled over. It was just like, oh, well, that's nice. But I would say, if anything, the Smart Gap was probably more pleased about it than George Becker, but neither one of them made most of it.
was he displeased or he just said he didn't care?
Well, he thought it was fine. He thought it was very nice that people appreciated what he was doing to that degree. And in fact, when Ken was at Mill, we started the area friends of Bluegrass and old-time country music. And one of our first concerts was going to be to have George Becker come up from North Carolina. But unfortunately, he didn't know how to switch planes. And he wound up staying in either New York at the party or Frequency, and that was it. And couldn't figure out why we weren't there to pick him up, and it's because he hadn't made the connection to come to Syracuse where we would be able to pick him up at the airport, so he just went back home again.
Hating these kids or they. So anyway, you became his
So the
record
impression
company.
you got is that he drank a lot, and he really didn't mind all that much. It was like, oh, I'm
Another
here.
adventure.
Yeah.
So anyway, what did you think of
I dare say he thought it was his hippies.
Okay.
Because there was a lot of that back at that time in particular. Although, oddly enough, I feel that on an individual level, even in the Deep South, there was far less of that kind of thing that you would find in Easy Body or those kinds of attitudes. And in fact, once they found out that you were familiar
thing, and you